right, this is Mr. Carley and Finnian. Can you say hi, Finnian?
Hi.
Hi, and we are going to tell you a little bit about IB Geography Unit 1. This is my first foray into geography, so hopefully we get it right. Unit 1 is changing population, Finny. How do you like that? Yeah. So the first topic, Finny, was understanding and describing population, so being able to explain it. There's a couple different things. The first thing, Finian, are physical and human factors that affect population distribution at a global scale. So we talked about density. Do you know what density is?
No.
Oh, density is when it's basically just people per square unit of land. So we're talking about how condensed the people are in an area. Then we've got distribution, which is where and how, population is spread. Usually we talk about three types, Finian. We talk about being clustered, which means like section in one area or along a geographic feature. Dispersed, which means kind of all over the place. And then linear usually means following a specific geographic feature like a river or the coast. And then we also talked about the big 7 factors that relate to population. So areas that are basically high or low in population or population density, you can relate those back to climate, relief / elevation, which means like how high off the ground or how high above sea level you are or how low you are. Access to water and soil and agricultural viability, natural human resources, history and political stability, that's a human factor, socioeconomic status of people, and then also things like urbanization, gentrification, and economic growth. What do you think? Is that all overwhelming?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you want to see a map?
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. We gotta get to this next part here. So we also talked about classifications of economic development. So you need to know kind of like 2 things
I don't want to see
that go into economic development. You don't want to see economic development?
No.
You have chocolate over your face?
No.
All right.
Now you just.
Okay, hang on. Perfect. Now we got a little bit of a glare going on, so that's epic. Anyhow, we've got so basically broken down into 3 categories. We've got to know what low-income countries, middle-income / emerging economies are, and high-income countries, and those are usually related to Human Development Index or GDP per capita, typically, is how they look at those. Human Development Index is going to look at things like GDP per capita in there already, life expectancy, and educational attainment are the 3 things that they look at. So you want to know what those are. And then at a national scale, we talked more about basically like population distribution, economic development, on focusing on key issues like internal migration. So we did a comparison in my class between China and the United States and looking at internal migration in that country and reasons for that. Core periphery patterns, which is the idea that as you see population and migration happen and population grow in certain areas, you will start to see like core economic areas develop, and then the outsides away from that area will be the peripheries, and you'll see migration in and out of those areas as well. It's kind of like suburbanization, and then also megacity growth, and those are large cities that have over 10 million people, and then looking at some of the issues that go along with those. We also had several graphs and models, so it's really important that you know the graphs and models that you need to know. Anywho, graphs and models. So here are the things that go with this topic area that you need to understand and be able to manipulate. So maps demonstrate economic development, population distribution. Those are typically choropleth and dot maps for the most part, being able to understand what they're telling you and being able to describe them especially. Various scales, so sometimes you get national and globally typically. Yes, sir, come here. She is going to come back later, yeah. Not right now, a little bit. She's not coming until 5 o'clock. Sorry. Another type of map you might see is a flow map, which usually depicts the movement of things, and in this case, it'd probably be movement and migration. The Lorenz curve is something else that showed up during this unit, and you just kind of, the way I've seen it used is you just have to understand what it's showing you. And it's just showing you that there's an uneven distribution of something. In economics, it's usually used to show an uneven distribution of income with something called the Gini coefficient. In this case, we're looking at how unevenly distributed population is throughout the world, especially at a global scale or even a regional scale. And then the core periphery process diagram, just looking at like the backflows of how you see the development of core and peripheral areas over time. So here's some examples of those. This is an example of a dot map showing population distribution at a global scale. Economic development at a global scale, looking at low income, emerging economies, and high income countries, and then showing what the average income, bless you, needs to be in order to be qualified in those areas. You've got the Lorenz curve. Again, see how it's a normal or a completely even distribution would be a line with a slope of 1. When it has this kind of like accelerating looking curve like this, it's showing that most of the data set is kind of falling in a small percentage of the total area. So that's what the Lorenz curve is showing, in this case, an unequal distribution of population. Here's a good example of some questions that you'd be asked. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but this is showing you you've got a little bit of Canada there, looking at some population distribution there. As you can see that it's really centered on the southeast and the south sides, along big cities, coasts, border of the United States, and they would ask you these types of questions about it. So you can stop and go through those if you'd like. I did this in my class or with our class as a quiz prep. 1.2. What are you up to, Finny? Sorry, he's putting something on the refrigerator. 1.2 was about changing population. So this is just looking at demographics or the study of population and how populations transition or change over time. The key vocab terms that you need to understand are the things that relate to demographic transition. So we have the crude death rate right there, number of deaths per 1,000 people, also known as the mortality rate. You need to be able to understand, if you're given information, how to find the crude birth rate. So that's the number of births per 1,000 people. The natural increase is going to be the difference between the crude birth rate and the crude death rate. If it's positive, that means you're having a natural increase. If it's negative, you're having a natural decrease. Life expectancy is the average number of years a member of a particular society is expected to live. Fertility rate is the average number of children a woman gives birth to during her lifetime, though technically, I guess it's during childbearing years specifically, otherwise the averages get skewed, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes. And infant mortality rate is the number of deaths of infants under 1 year old per 1,000 live births per year. You should be able to compare these transitions and these different demographic factors across different nations. What we did is we looked at France versus Ethiopia, so looking at a more developed or high income country, high economic developed country, low economic developed country, or developing nation, emerging country, and looking at what those different factors look like. So being able to understand those and be able to compare them. Consequences of megacity growth. We will study this more with urbanization, but you should know a couple positive and negative consequences of megacity growth, whether it be economic development, pollution, opportunities for technology, things like that. And then the last thing we did is we made infographics on different types of forced migration and internal displacement. And we really looked at what are some environmental push factors, so things about the physical environment that are pushing people out of areas, displacing them or causing them to migrate involuntarily, and then also political factors, which are a little easier to understand and typically are typically the causes and then might be kind of symptoms of broader physical or environmental changes. So one of the key figures you need to understand and be able to manipulate is the population structure. So this is a population pyramid, and this kind of describes what it is. Basically, it's showing the percentage of a total population broken down by sex, and then also looking at the percentage of that population that falls in that age range. It helps you look at effects of migration, war, natural disasters, economic changes. It also can tell you where in the demographic transition model a nation is. So this nation on the left here has a very high birth rate, but not a lot of people are living into, past 60 years old, into that like older aging population. So this is indicating that this is going to be a growing population, but right now has a pretty high or a pretty low life expectancy. Whereas this nation over here is getting a little more of a bulge, which means they're starting to see some declining birth rates potentially, but they're going to have a higher kind of middle-aged population soon, which might be the beginning of what's called the demographic dividend, which is something that comes up a little bit later. Demographic transition model is a good thing to understand. The 5 stages, looking at as a nation industrializes, you start to see first a fall in the death rate pretty precipitously, whereas birth rates kind of stay stagnant, and that's why your population pyramid kind of looks like this. And then you start to see kind of like a shortening of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, so it kind of becomes like a U-shape parabola, and that's where you start to see both falling death rates and falling birth rates, and then eventually they kind of almost like overlap each other, and the population starts to stagnate. So here you have you have a rapid increase in the population as these death rates really fall. Then you start to see kind of a falling, or sorry, you start to see kind of a falling birth rate and the death rate falling more slowly. So you start to see the increase in the population still increasing but slowing down. And then as the nation gets into this later stage, kind of in post like late industrialization, you start to see both low birth and death rates with a high population, not a lot of change. And eventually nobody's really experienced stage 5. Japan might be getting there. Stage 5 is going to be where you actually see your population possibly falling over time. So knowing this transition, knowing what the characteristics are of a nation that goes through these transitions and how to tell is going to be beneficial for paper 2 as well. Dependency ratio is something you need to know how to calculate and what it means. So it's a shorthand measure comparing the proportion of the population that is economically quote unquote non-productive with the proportion that theoretically generates wealth. Hey sir, what's up? All right, magnets?
Yeah. You want to see what's new?
Sure, I would love to. A society with a dependency ratio of 60 plus is thought of as high, has a high dependency ratio. There's a lot of people not economically active compared to the people that are economically active. Oh yeah, there's a lot there. Thank you.
Do you like them?
I really do.
Do you want them?
Sure, I'll take them. Do you want to sit on my lap for the end of this? No? Okay, all right. So the way that you do the formula is the dependency ratio is the percentage under 15 on the population pyramid plus the percentage over 65, the older part of the population pyramid, divided by the middle, whatever's left, times 100. So 60 plus is usually high. Japan, for example, high dependency ratio, has an aging population. Here's an example of across the world what we're seeing as age dependency ratios most recently. I do. I like them a lot. You're right. So just for all the viewers, I have a 3 and a 7. Okay.
One more.
This is a J. It's not even a number.
Let's put this over
Okay.
here.
Forced migration, my friends, is like this J being forced to move away from the numbers in the magnets, like the 3 and the 7. Internally displaced people are people who have to move but stay in the country where they are. They're internally displaced people. And then lastly but not leastly, we talked about common causes, environmental, political. I'll leave those there so you can see them because my attention is being withdrawn from me right now. So that's pretty much 1.1 and 1.2. The second part of the review video, we will talk about 1.3, which are policies related to population. Yes, sir. Do you want to say bye to everyone?
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. All right, I'll keep this here for a second just so you can see it. And yeah, we'll talk later about 1.3 and what paper 2 will actually look like also. All right, thank you, everybody.